All right, guys, welcome back to the Established Fast Podcast, presented by ClutchPoints. I'm your host, Blake Lovell. With me, as always, my co-host, Dillon Reagan, back here to make our picks for Week 15 in the NFL. And I've had a little bit of a break here, Dillon, but me not having a voice has not helped that matter. Hopefully I can get through this one without coughing every other pick, but we will do our best on that. But a lot of interesting matchups heading into Week 15. With obviously a lot of playoff implications as we now get to this point in the season.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite times of the whole season when you get down to the final few weeks. Still, maybe not as many teams in the race as I kind of thought there would be earlier in the year or even compared to last year. The AFC has had a kind of a divide. There are 3 teams tied for that last playoff spot right now. NFC really has a bigger divide. The Lions kind of trying to creep up there to make it interesting, right? It's been fun watching them the last few weeks. The fact they were favored, I know we would have enjoyed that on the if we'd done an episode last week, the fact the Lions were favored over the Vikings, and sure enough, they won that game. It's getting down to it, but I do think despite there being these teams in the playoff races, at least in my mind, we're starting to finally have an idea of on both conferences who are the teams that really have a chance to make the Super Bowl. I don't know if we're going to have a team that's I think the Bengals were the 4 seed in the AFC last year and the Rams were in the NFC. I don't know if we're going to see teams that deep making runs unless it's a team like Dallas maybe. But yeah, it should be fun. Some, like you said, good matchups. All the bye weeks are finally over. We're on to fantasy playoffs too. It's all good stuff right now. It should be a fun weekend.
Well, there's an interesting, and I know we always kind of talk about some random stuff, but when you look at the playoff race, there's obviously a lot of we look at the quarterbacks on these teams, and, there's a lot of guys that have not really been in the league that long that kind of have their teams in position to have a lot of success. Of course, Burrow leading the Bengals to the Super Bowl last year, but Bill Barnwell did an interesting thing, I guess it was, about a week ago for ESPN Plus. He did a re-ranking, and we'll get into our picks in a second, but this is kind of an interesting discussion that people have had. He basically re-ranked the top quarterbacks in the 2020 draft, which, again, is honestly, Dillon, it feels like it was 5 years ago, but it's only been a couple years. But so it is kind of fascinating to look at from that standpoint. But I think the main focus was looking at the 4 guys in particular, with Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, Jalen Hurts, and Tua Tagovailoa. And really just kind of looking at that group and saying, if we had to do this over now, like, where would you go? Like, what would be the first choice? It's honestly, when I first looked at this and I've seen people discuss it, I don't really know what I expected the overwhelming answer to be, like, for the number one choice. But, like, I think it's a very interesting order because I could go back and forth on several of these. And, like, I'll talk about it in a second. But, like, there's one guy I think I would put fourth that I would have never expected I'd put fourth. Yeah. But, again, I think it's what you value, right? And kind of understanding the value that each brings only a couple years into their NFL careers. But it is a fascinating discussion to try to figure out what order to put those 4 in.
It's just a really tough one because they've all been so good, especially this year, obviously, with Jalen Hurts ascending, Tua taking his game to a different level with Mike McDaniel until maybe the last few weeks. We have the benefit of watching that Dolphins-Charger game, whereas Bill Barnwell, when he wrote this, did not. Wrote this beforehand. And some of his rankings, like you said, when I thought about it too, and as I was reading through it the other last, I think, Sunday before the Sunday night game, I just really didn't know which direction I was going to go outside of who I ultimately did agree with his number 1 pick, but maybe a lot of people, like, for example, if we went to, at the same time, maybe in 2020, let's say it was late in the 2020 season, we were to look at the 2018 quarterbacks. I think at that point, you would have seen the way that Josh Allen had ascended, and he kind of would have been clearly the number 1 guy we would have gone with, and then Lamar Jackson probably sitting at number 2 in some area around there. The Browns were a playoff team that year, so Baker probably still would have been in the equation. But there was a better separation, I think, if you did the same 3-year exercise for this 2018 QBs. I think 3 years is a good time period. It gives the guys enough time to get used to the NFL, used to their systems. Clearly with Tua and Jalen Hurts, we wouldn't have had the same opinions of them after last year as we do now. But I do think it's just a way tougher conversation overall. I personally still think Burrow would be my top guy, just given, out of all 4 of these guys. We'll see what happens if the Dolphins can still make the playoffs. I know their schedule is not exactly easy. We're going to see what Jalen Hurts does, and he might win the MVP. But just given what Burrow did last year, what he's been able to fight through this year, I know he has a lot of weapons, but still with He's kind of gotten worked on, not taking as many sacks and just so accurate. Just a guy that you feel like you're going to trust. I think I'd take him still first. Maybe that's like a safe pick. I don't know. But kind of everyone's got, like you said, is going to have different opinions. After that, I'm curious to see what you say. So Bill Barnwell at the end sums it up. He went with Burrow as well as his first pick. Then he goes Jalen Hurts, Tua, and then Herbert as his final pick. I don't think I'm going to go with that exact order, but it is really hard to be like, you're the fourth guy here, right? Because like all of them bring so much, and the whole exercise is to look at, obviously Jalen Hurts fits better with the Eagles than some other quarterbacks would run other teams. Maybe Tua on the Chargers would have, it would be a much different system, obviously, than what Mike McDaniel's brought. So this is trying to like separate all that, right? Like if you had a team that's on level playing ground, they're average in every part of it. That's kind of the the sample that Barnwell is trying to look at. And it gets tough because as much as like I said, Jalen Hurts might win the MVP. You think about him without that offensive line, without some of the weapons they have, and what Sirianni has been able to do the last couple of years with him. Is he quite as high? I don't know if I'd have him in the second spot, but I have a hard time putting him into the fourth spot at least.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. I think Burrow is number one. That I didn't have a lot of trouble with, but like my problem is I think I have a hard time putting Justin Herbert at 4.
Yeah.
And so then it's like, well, what do I do? Like, how do I? Then it's like, I don't think I could put Jalen Hurts there, right? So I almost feel like I would slide Tua into 4, but I don't know if that's being unfair either, because I think the thing is with Tua, like, and look, we're coming off a game where we're having this discussion, and it's like, okay, well, you can certainly make a snap judgment one way or the other based on that one game, but it's much bigger than that. And I mean, look, let's call it what it is, right? Like Tyreek Hill makes Tua's job a lot easier, and that's not, we didn't knock Patrick Mahomes, so he's he was just a product of Tyreek Hill, and I'm not saying that Tua is either, but I think Tyreek Hill is just to the point where like I think he can certainly clean up some things that I don't know, like I'm not like I don't want that just to be the discussion, but I do think it's one where. I don't know. Like again, I feel like I can't put Burrow anywhere other than 1. I think he's the clear one for me. But I feel like Justin Herbert is one where I know there've been people that kind of knock, him, and he's, certainly had these. He probably, without looking at it, Dylan, I assume of this group, he's probably the leader in interceptions, right? He's probably thrown more this season, I would guess, than.
He's just thrown more passes than any of these guys. But
I was going to say he's thrown a lot more passes too, and I think that's something that his numbers aren't going to be maybe as efficient, but he throws a ton. And I'm looking at this here. There's only been one game where he's thrown less than 34 passes this season. Yeah. And I'm looking like at Tua. There's only been 3 games Tua's thrown more than 35 passes. So like those are interesting things that I think you have to factor in too. Yeah. Oh man, I don't know. Like this is I think for me, like that's Burrow's the number 1. I guess you kind of have to put Jalen Hurts at number 2, because I think you have to weigh this season, right? Like you can't just say, you have to weigh it. But then I think the biggest debate for me is, and look, like I said, I don't think you can just make this answer off this one game. Like you can't just say, oh, it's got to be this or that because of this guy beat this guy. I don't think that's how you can do it. But it is more interesting than I thought in terms of Burrow and Hurts probably being 1 and 2 and not really knowing what to do with the 3-4 of Herbert and Tua.
Yeah, I think like I was saying, this conversation is different if we didn't have, I wouldn't just say the Charger game, but also the 49er game for the Dolphins, and even the second half after Teron Armstead got hurt against Houston. They scored 30 in that first half. Once he's out, they don't put up another point. They end up taking Tua, pulling him early. They had a big lead, but he also was kind of had a nagging injury there. I just think with Herbert, some of the issues with the play calling that people have had are definitely contribute. The fact that until this last game against the Dolphins, he'd only had 30 snaps with Mike Williams and Keenan Allen both in the game all year. So and also Rashawn Slater, obviously their star tackle's been out that had such a promising start to his career for the Chargers. So it's not like he hasn't had issues with some of the weapons and some of the guys he's had as well. I just think he has more answers to what defenses can ultimately challenge him with. I don't know if I know Lombardi's again, their offense coordinator has gone through a lot of criticism this year for some of the play calling for the Chargers, but with all the injuries they've had in the offensive line, it's just been kind of tough. It is the consistency you want to see from Herbert week to week. We see the games where he struggles against worse defenses, throws some picks that don't make sense, right? But when he needs to, he can make that deep throw like 50 yards down the hash, whereas when in this game against the Chargers in particular, when they started taking away the middle of the field for Tua, he wasn't making the outside throws. They're not even trying to in a lot of cases, and it completely hampered their offense. They only had the one big touchdown throw to Tyreek Hill. If they don't have that fumble recovery crazy touchdown, then they get cleaned up by a Charger defense that has not been great all year. So it is tough. I think Tua is still really good, and I think his accuracy has obviously been fantastic in what they've been able to do in Miami. They don't have the greatest offensive line. They have to throw the ball quick a lot of times too. I still think just Herbert's physical tools for me, when I think about what he could do over the course of his career, I still almost put him up in the 2, but like you said, I think because of what Jalen Hurts has done this year, I think my ultimate order would probably be Burrow, Hurts, slightly over Herbert, and then slightly over Tua. That would be my 4, but it's not an easy conversation, which is it just shows that all 4 of these fan bases and all 4 quarterbacks should feel pretty good about where they are. I know there's some frustration for Charger fans thinking that, and we obviously one of us having them going all the way, at least pretty far.
That was season. You, right? That was you. That wasn't me.
Expectations,
right?
Yeah, exactly. The expectations were high for them, and they're still, the schedule does line up well for them. This is the exact time when, as the Chargers find a way to kind of screw things up, but we'll see how Herbert closes out the season. But I still think I'd put him at 3 just because what I believe he can do, and mentally he's all there. All these guys are, but I think he has just maybe a few more physical tools that I think in the NFL allow you to make plays that when things break down that some of the other guys in the league overall just can't do.
By the way, I was talking about Herbert having more interceptions. You know what happens? I completely blocked out the fact that Joe Burrow threw 4 interceptions in the opening week against the Steelers, and I forgot about that game. I was like, he hasn't thrown a ton since then, I don't think, and he hasn't. He's only thrown 5 since that point. But there are thoughts on the quarterbacks that we will also be talking about here as we go through our Week 15 picks. And just for reference, I know I have my Titans sweatshirt on here, Dillon, but as we all know, I'm a gear guy. I've got shirts for half the teams in the NFL probably at this point, and the Titans just happen to be in the rotation. So Chargers fans, I just made the case for Justin Herbert. I'm not, leaning. I'm not giving you anything with my pick here because as you'll see, I'm not picking the Titans. Spoiler alert. All right, let's go to our Week 15 picks. We start with our games of the week as always, and we'll get into our betting locks, upsets, and quick picks from there. Games of the week. We just talked about, we're going to talk about 2 of these quarterbacks, actually. The Dolphins are at the Bills. One of our games here of the week. 7.5-point favorites are the Bills in Buffalo. And, Dillon, I didn't have much of a problem making my pick here. I think the Bills are the choice, and I think it's just probably coming off of what we've seen from the Dolphins against the Chargers and just feeling like, I don't know, this is another kind of tough game away from Miami, and just I think with where the Bills are right now, I still feel like the Bills are in a pretty good spot, and I have questions a little bit about kind of where the Dolphins are at. And look, the Dolphins are a little banged up too, right? So, Jeff Wilson, I don't know what his status is. Waddle, Tua, these are all guys that have had injuries, this season and such. So, still some questions there, and of course Tyreek Hill too, right? Like he was hobbling a little bit. What was that? Recently. So a lot of questions, I think, just about, where the Dolphins are at, but I think the Bills are the better choice.
Yeah, I had to pick Buffalo here. I know that the game earlier this season, Miami found a way to win. It was, and it's a reason why it's here as a game of the week, one of the best games of the whole season. The finish there, very dramatic at the end between those 2 teams, but very different conditions, right? We're due for likely there's snow in the forecast for Saturday night. It's going to be in the high 20s. Who knows what the wind's going to be like in Buffalo? It's usually pretty crazy compared to that game where both Miami and Buffalo players were cramping up from the heat. It's just going to be completely a different setup. I do think, the things, with Armstead still out and just already that itself and how it's affected Miami. Outside of before the Charger game, the Bills were the only other team that was really pressing with success against the receivers of Miami. Instead of letting these guys get free releases, it still was help over the top and everything. And the pass rush actually looked pretty solid last week, despite Von Miller being out for Buffalo. Some of these other guys, Gregory Rousseau and some of the other members of that defensive line really kind of stepped up. So I think that the Bills are they're just a better team at this point. I think they do match up pretty well. Miami, could have given up more points to the Chargers. We know what the Chargers have struggled in the red zone over the course of the year. Not that Josh Allen and his receivers haven't had their fair share of some moments in the last few weeks where things just look a little bit off from what we're used to. But they're still the Bills. They still have just an overwhelming amount of talent. And I do worry for what Miami wants to do in the passing game if this is not a matchup that's going to be a little bit tough with the conditions. We'll see. If Miami comes out and win this one, that'll be a big statement and huge for their playoff chances because, as we mentioned, those three teams are one game back of them, all tied for that last spot. Schedule not easy for Miami, so this is a huge game for both teams, but I think Buffalo finds a way to win, and maybe it's not quite as good of a game as the one that they played earlier, and then I think it was week 2. I still think this will be a tighter one than we might the 7.5 point spread might indicate. I think we might have a game that's more in that 4 to 5 point range.
All right, our other game of the week, the Bengals are at the Bucs. The Bengals 3.5 point favorites in this one in Tampa. We just talked about Burrow, like very easy number one choice, but I feel like I don't know how many times I picked the Bucs this year, and they've lost a lot of these games, Dillon. But you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna do it again here because for one reason, I'm gonna tell you this. For one reason is I think I was looking for a couple of upsets somewhere, and as you're gonna see here in a second, I actually picked another upset I don't think I ever thought I would pick, but we just know how the NFL works, right? There's going to be a couple of upsets somewhere, and I was like, all right, let me just find a couple that may pan out. I mean, this is one where you got a Bucs team that's still playing for the division, in quite a division, as we know. And I think they certainly have a lot to play for here. Bengals, obviously injuries have been a factor there too, but, I mean, with Burrow and Jamar Chase, you just expect them to figure it out. But I'm going to pick the Bucs here, but look, my confidence in the Bucs after getting blown out and against the Niners is not very high, but to me, this seems like one where maybe the Bucs are able to kind of will themselves to a win here, knowing that, again, there's a lot to play for. They don't have the division locked up like we probably would have thought they would.
No.
At this point. They've still got a ton to play for here, so I'm gonna take a chance and pick this as one of my upsets of the week.
Yeah, only a game up on Atlanta and Carolina. Carolina has that win in their back pocket, too, against Tampa. So it's a huge game for them. I don't, ultimately, whoever wins this division is probably going to play Dallas. Tampa probably the toughest team that you could pick out between those three for that matchup. But I know they've won a couple games here and there to kind of keep themselves afloat atop the division. But it's still some of the same issues. A lot of teams are going to get bounce around by the 49ers right now with the way those guys are cooking. But I don't know. It just feels like so many things are still disjointed. It's not even close to the team from last year that still looked like it had a solid chance to defend its title. I think the defense is still pretty good. Overall, on offense, there are big issues, obviously, running the ball. And that's the thing with Cincinnati's defense. I just think, and this is one of the points we wanted to talk about, and we've kind of mentioned this previously in the podcast, Cincinnati just looks like a more complete team than even last year. They were DVOA-wise, yes, but also just watching them, you're like, they have just more answers for everything other teams are doing. The defense, DJ Reader's been an absolute monster for Cincinnati. I think they're better than the team that made the Super Bowl last year for sure, and that's not saying they're going to make it this year. It's really, they had to have a lot of things break their way against the Chiefs and against the Titans and even the Bills losing. I don't know if that matchup last year if they had to go to Buffalo instead of Kansas City, if things play out differently. But I think their offense has taken it to another level. They're running the ball much better than last year. The offensive line has picked it up over the course of the year. They've had injuries here and there with, they get Jamar Chase back, but then T will go out and Tyler Boyd was out for this past game for most of it. But then you have guys like Trent Taylor and Trent Irwin stepping up and making plays and making blocks, and it's all worked well for them. I just think they're a better team at this point, so going to pick them to win this game. I think it should be a really fun one still. I think Tampa will still hold it a little bit closer, but I think ultimately the Bengals win this game by at least 4 some odd points. I just think they're like at the top when we're talking about that separation of Super Bowl contenders in the AFC and NFC. I put the Bills and Chiefs are probably the first two you think of in the AFC, but I think the Bengals have established themselves with those two teams as a legit Super Bowl contender. They're hoping for a little help with some of the teams playing the Ravens. The Ravens keep holding on to that lead there atop the division without Lamar. But I think Cincinnati, they've just been so fun to watch, and should be an interesting one against this Bucs defense. I think again they're gonna keep finding those answers to the questions that are posed to them by the opposing team.
Yeah, Bucs not a lot of confidence in them right now, but I guess I'll go back to the well here and try to see if they can find one given what's at stake. But we'll see if that happens. On to our betting locks. Well, this is unusual. Usually we have different ones we try to find, but this week I was like, nope, Dillon, here's the deal. I cannot find any other than the one you picked. I was like, let's both just go with that because I don't love any of the other options that are out there for our betting locks. So we both decided to go to Seattle, where the Niners are on the road as 3-point favorites in Seattle against the Seahawks. Certainly I think, quarterback situation, I don't know what was Brock Purdy's status as of right now. Dillon, I know it's
supposed to be
like he's gonna
tomorrow.
play.
I think tomorrow's when they'll know one way or the other. Is the last I'd seen yesterday.
Yeah. Well, I think we're gonna assume he's gonna play. And he obviously looked really good against the Bucs, and so that gives you a little more confidence, I guess, in the Niners, not just in this game, but maybe moving forward. Because look, this is still a team that I think is built to win a Super Bowl, right? It's trying to figure out. We got a 1-game sample size, right, on Brock Purdy in terms of playing at that type of level. So it's, I think, again, this is a bigger question that maybe goes just beyond this game because we're both picking the Niners as our betting locks to win this game by a field goal on the road. But it's, do they still have enough? And, of course, Debo's injury factors in and those kind of things. But defense is there. A lot of pieces on this roster, and I think now it's just, do you reset your expectations, or is this a team that really looks like they could possibly make a Super Bowl run?
Yeah, I think Purdy playing, it's crazy to say this, given it's only been a 1-game sample size. It feels like it's fairly important. I know a lot of quarterbacks have been propped up by the Kyle Shanahan offense. If you look at yards per attempt over, however many last years, like guys like Nick Mullins and CJ Beathard are on lists, like with players you would expect that are legitimate starters year in and year out. So how much is this? It's the system. I know at least against Tampa Bay, Brock made some good throws, was also throwing outside the numbers a bit more than maybe we see at times. Even Jimmy was, and Jimmy was playing really well before his injury this year. I think better than arguably than last year. It helps having Christian McCaffrey, helps having these weapons. Other things to keep in mind, obviously Debo's injury luckily didn't break his ankle. It looks like I think Kyle Shanahan said he's probably out 3 weeks, so that puts him back for the playoffs. They win this game to clinch the division, so I think they're not going to get the 1 seed over the Eagles at this point, but can they still make a Super Bowl run with Purdy over Jimmy G? I don't, until we see that they look considerably worse, I have a hard time saying they don't have a shot because of a few factors. The NFC, it just doesn't, it's not that deep of a conference. I think the Vikings, as we've talked about, we think they're maybe better than the DVOA numbers put them at. They're probably still not quite on the level of Philadelphia, San Francisco, and I'd still throw Dallas in there even after they barely escaped against Houston last week. But I think the Niners are arguably the second best team in this conference, and that gives them a puncher's chance at, maybe we put here winning the Super Bowl, just making the Super Bowl. At least I could see it being a possibility. Also because number 2, the defense is ridiculous. They've just really come on in a way that I had concerns about the secondary as we did at points last season, and that did cost them at times. And eventually in that Rams game, and a lot of teams, were last year with that Rams offense, it wasn't going to be easy to defend them. But they've just come on to a ridiculous level. They stayed healthier. They have a lot of the key guys in there. So between those two factors, and just with Purdy, it's really early, but there's something to be said about him playing almost all 4 years, I believe, at Iowa State. And, the guy, we've seen this with other guys that come into the league that play at a university. It's in a big conference, but it's not like a big school. And they have to go against really tough competition without the same weapons that you might have at Alabama. Obviously, we now have a lot of really good Alabama quarterbacks in the NFL, but there was a time when there was guys from bigger schools that had like dominant people around them to get to the NFL, and it's just not the same kind of thing. So maybe there is something more to Brock Purdy than we've kind of missed out on when he went to the last pick in the draft. I don't know, but either way, at least with we don't have to evaluate him with any other team except for this one with the weapons they have in Kyle Shanahan. So If they do it, I think the defense is going to pull a lot of the weight. It's going to be a lot of other players around Purdy being the reason they do it. It's just a testament, I think, to how good this organization has become, unfortunately for me as a Rams fan, and the depth that they've kind of built up. And I think, yeah, they're in a great spot, and it's crazy that, they've lost their two, going back to Trey Lance early in the year, and now Jimmy G. It's crazy they're to a third quarterback, and we're still talking about them as a contender to make the Super Bowl. There's very few teams, even some of the best teams in the league, I don't think we'd be saying the same thing about.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. So we'll see how it plays out here with the Niners. A lot of momentum. See if they can keep that going in a tough divisional matchup on the road here late in the season. All right, to our upsets of the week. As I said, I've already got one upset I picked with the Bucs over the Bengals, but surprisingly not my biggest upset from a point spread standpoint because I didn't expect to do this, Dillon. I'm gonna need you to tell me why I can be right here, because the Dallas Cowboys are 4-point favorites on the road in Jacksonville against the Jaguars. Now, again, maybe the sweatshirt I'm wearing here is maybe if I was wearing like my Rams sweatshirt or Chargers or somebody else, maybe I'd been a little bit different. But maybe the fact that I saw what the Jags did against the Titans gives you a little bit of confidence here, and you saw the Cowboys struggle a little bit with the Texans. Maybe the Cowboys just, Dillon, have a thing against these AFC South teams. But although the Colts would beg to differ about that, since the Cowboys struggled with them for a little bit before just completely obliterating the Colts. But this one's on the road, a Jacksonville team that has nothing to lose at this point. I know you kind of the words you said, they're very inconsistent. You don't really know what you're going to get from Jacksonville, but I don't know. Was the Cowboys thing against the Texans, was that just, kind of one of those things that happens, or does it, do you kind of see them going on the road here? I'm going to take a chance with the Jags because, again, I think there's going to be a couple upsets somewhere in the league. I just don't, I think this is one of those that maybe you could see. But obviously, I still feel pretty confident what the Cowboys can do. But, hey, we got to pick an upset somewhere, and I'm going to go with this as another one for me.
I could see it. I picked the Cowboys, obviously. Yeah. But the game's in Jacksonville. I think that as much as teams have, like Houston, just played fine in Dallas, I wouldn't say that the Cowboys' home field advantage is like overwhelming compared to some of the league, but I think there is something to be said about playing in Jacksonville. Just weird things tend to happen in games there for both teams, not always just for the opponent.
Yeah.
I think, the reason they have a puncher's chance is because of what Trevor Lawrence has started to become. I think no matter what happens with the season, I think they're 5-8 still. They have a shot, I guess, at the division. If they were to win out, they'd have the tiebreaker at that point because they would have, if they beat Tennessee again and Tennessee just loses one other game. It could happen. I'm not saying it's going to, but they still have a puncher's chance. But at 5-8, if I'm a fan of this team, I'm more just thrilled about how good the passing game has started to develop into. It's 8th in pass offense DVOA now with almost a full sample size of the whole season. I mean, I would have, if you're a Jaguars fan, if you told me they've started looking this good, and again, the consistency isn't always there, but I think they are figuring some things out. I think Trevor is starting to cut out some of the mistakes that he at times was making. I'm just excited about the direction of this team. The defense at times looks great. Other times looks awful. They're just young, I think. They have a lot of guys that are still figuring themselves out. They're really good rush defense. So I think matchup-wise, or at least I shouldn't say really good, but at least league average, whereas they're against the pass, they've still struggled, and I think they'll address that this offseason. But against Dallas's offense, that's a okay recipe because this is a team that really relies on the running game still, even with some of the acrobatic catches that CD makes. You saw it at times with some of the plays that Dak made. I mean, they should have, honestly, offensively, they should have lost that game to Houston. They played terribly, and if it wasn't for a 4th down, goal line stand there at the end, they do lose by their defense. I think their defense is the reason I'm still picking them in this game. I still think it's going to be probably one of the biggest challenges that Lawrence has had all year, arguably facing this unit with the number 1 pass defense DVOA in the league. So I'll pick Dallas to win, but I for an upset pick, this is a good one for given how, I'm sure that a lot of the money is on Dallas. ESPN Football Power Index, I was trying to check to help you out, figuring if there's anything pointing towards a Jaguar win. It's still 72% Cowboys.
Yeah.
But I could see it. It definitely could happen if Trevor, maybe this is the game we look back in the offseason. We're talking about the state of all these teams and the quarterback situation. Maybe this is the game we point to and say this is the day that Trevor Lawrence became the Trevor Lawrence we all expected him to be in the NFL.
Well, we'll see. I feel like there's always a game the Cowboys lose at some point where it's like everyone just meltdown mode. And I feel like this could be the one. Obviously, what happened last week if they'd lost the Texans, but I feel like maybe this is one they lose and it's just total meltdown in that regard. But we'll see. I think yours is a better choice here for the upset of the week. The Ravens are at the Browns. Browns 3-point favorites at home in Cleveland. Of course, the Ravens going to be without Lamar still, and Browns have been, I guess, okay under Deshaun Watson thus far, but it's still, they've certainly not had the season they've wanted to have here. And so I picked the Browns. I mean, I think that I would probably still take them. Again, it's the Lamar impact, I think, for me is probably makes it tougher. But at the same time, I feel like this is more of like a toss-up than it is a Browns 3-point favorite. But if they're the home team, not surprised they're getting a field goal here. But a pretty even game in my opinion. So I think yours is probably a little bit closer to having an upset choice here.
And the fact that Huntley might not even I think he's going to play.
That's true.
The reports I'm looking at say he's back at practice, but he's already been hampered by injuries, which takes away a lot of what he adds to the offense. I overall have been impressed with him just as a backup and how he's fit into that system. I picked the Ravens just because I still think they're a better team. I think their defense has really come on. The Roquan Smith trade, I think, for them has been huge in terms of his impact on that whole unit. They really had a hole in the middle. We've talked before the season about Patrick Queen not exactly living up to his what we thought he might be. He's been better, I think, since they got Roquan. I think together they've just been the defense has started to come along. The secondaries look better. They're just in a place that, last year, even with they obviously had a ton of injuries, but they kind of had slipped. And even going into the start of this year, I wasn't so sure about what they're going to be. They're still not a dominant defense probably, but they're ranking in top 10, really balanced against the passing, against the run. The offense still runs the ball really well overall, still have a good offensive line. So maybe it's, again, not as dominant as years past, but I think it's good enough probably to get a win here. The thing about Cleveland, they are, as we've talked about, their offense with Jacoby Brissett actually looked pretty good. They looked worse so far with Deshaun Watson. Still along, understandably, he didn't play football even for a long period of time. It's not easy just to ramp things up and fit into a new system. So I understand some of that, but at the end of the day, this is more also this pick probably about Cleveland. Their defense against the run is one of the worst in the league, and the Ravens are a really good rush offense. So I just think, I was surprised by the 3-point spread. I don't know. It's less about the quarterback position for the Ravens. I know that if Lamar obviously was in there, it changes things dramatically, but if it's Tyler Huntley or someone else, I still think the Ravens defense is really good, and I think they're going to be, even if the Browns try to load the box, they might have some trouble defending the run in this one. So I'll pick Baltimore to keep it going and keep the Bengals fended off from that division lead. I know it's going to be probably neck and neck, and whoever loses that one's not going to want to have to play a road playoff game in that division, but we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see how it plays out. Another big divisional matchup here with, again, playoff implications on the line. All right, to our quick picks we go. We will stroll through these quickly, as always. All right, Dillon, the Colts are at the Vikings. Vikings, 4-point favorites at home in Minneapolis. Give me the Vikings over the very inconsistent Colts.
Yeah, I'm picking the Vikings as well. Even if I have mentioned some doubts about Minnesota, the defense in particular has been pretty interesting. And the Colts have played some teams close, so maybe they do keep it close. But I think the Vikings are the pick here for me.
The Eagles, 9-point favorites on the road in Chicago against the Bears, which I think, Dillon, will get back, of course, Justin Fields and having a nice little, I think that's a big part of this in terms of just having him, I guess, as close to healthy as you can be as a quarterback at this point in the season. But I think still you're not going to pick against the Eagles here. I could see, look, the Eagles' defense has been really good, but I could see Justin Fields doing some things to make this interesting, but you're not picking against the Eagles, right?
No, the Bears' defense is bad. Since they've traded guys like Roquan and Robert Quinn, I look at this from the perspective of a Jalen Hurts and Devontae Smith fantasy owner, and I'm feeling pretty good about this matchup going into that playoff game this week. Those guys, I think they're going to have a field day in this one. But the Eagles have had some closer games. Think about that Colts game. Some ones where they just haven't played to the potential and what they've shown for most of the season. So maybe the Bears score some points again, as we've talked about on this podcast over and over again, from Chicago's point of view, you're just happy that Fields looks really good. Probably just want him to stay relatively healthy going into the offseason. That's your bigger concern. I think they'll still be fighting offensively in this one, but I think the Eagles are just too much. So, yeah, Philly's the pick.
Falcons at the Saints. The Saints are 4-point favorites in this one. Of course, a new era for the Falcons. Desmond Ridder going to be at quarterback, but I don't think that's a great place to start playing on the road in New Orleans. A rowdy environment against the Saints. Saints have not been, world beaters by any means, but I think, first quarterback with first start on the other side, missing, a key guy like Kyle Pitts in the offense, and probably still going to run the ball, Dillon. Let's just call it what it is. Falcons want to run it, but I think the Saints are the pick here.
Yeah, well, I don't know. These games have been weird. Even when one of these teams is good, this rivalry, as you know, it always kind of ends up still evening out kind of by the end of it. I picked the Saints as well. I didn't have a great feeling of either team. I just think ultimately another defense that's been really bad is Atlanta's. They've kept some games closer. Early in the season we were impressed with them, and they still, just like Carolina, they're only a game back of Tampa, but I think this is one where they come back to earth in New Orleans while being inconsistent. I still think at home, like you said, they'll have an impact here, and that maybe the Superdome will have a good atmosphere, given it's one of their biggest rivals, even with a kind of a lost season there for New Orleans.
All right, here's another one. You and I are going different directions in, and this might be interesting for our yearly picks contest. I don't know who's leading right now, but
you are slightly, I believe, like two
slight
games,
favorite,
maybe, something
but
like that.
I shouldn't have went overboard on my upset picks perhaps. But this one is a toss-up as the Lions head to East Rutherford to play the Jets at MetLife Stadium there. This one is a toss-up. So take your pick, 50-50 on this one, and it looks like you and I are going to be 50-50 on this one. I'm going to take the Jets under, I think we assume Mike White's going to be ready to play in this one, so I think that's a big part of it. And the defense for the Jets, I think, has just been obviously really, really good. Yeah. Lions' offense, though, has been really good too, and I think this is actually one of the more fascinating games of the week. I really like what the Lions are doing. They got a lot of confidence right now, but something about the Jets, I think the Jets find a way to grind out a win here.
Yeah, I had a tough feeling on this one. There's a reason it's an even spread. Like, they're just such different teams. Both teams that are the Jets maybe a little early in terms of hitting their window right now out of the playoffs and that tiebreaker, but still have a chance to get in there. Winning this game will go a long way. We'll see when they're fully healthy. I really still like their offensive line. And I just something about Detroit on defense, even they've started to pick it up a bit. Obviously not even close to what the Jets now have. It's crazy given that they're like bottom 3 DVOA defense. Now they're 6th. And we have seen the Lions struggle with some good defenses this year. So maybe I'm being a little naive with this pick, picking the Lions to win on the road. But I think they've just discovered some things. I think the offensive line for Detroit, I think that was another topic where some metrics are saying they're not that great. I mean, if you watch them and just look at the pockets that Jared's throwing out of, they've had a pretty good situation. They're healthier than they've been for a lot of the season on offense overall with some of the skill positions. So maybe it's just not enough from this Jets offense to get the win. I'll probably look stupid when the Lions score 7 or 9 points or whatever, and the Jets find a way to tough this one out. Maybe this is a good over game if you get the win here. Yeah. In terms of our overall picks, though, I think I'm not sure after this last week, but before the Week 14 games, you had a better record than every one of the top ESPN.
Oh wow! How about that?
Their article they put out with all their experts and stuff. You were one game up on the top person. I was one game back on that person. So I think we're neck and neck. Even if it hasn't felt like it's been the most successful picking season for us, it just shows how tough it's been for everyone.
Well, then if that's the case, I'd like to change my pick. I want to pick the Bengals and the Cowboys because I was just kind of going out on a limb here. So now I feel like I got to go back and change my picks. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to stick with them, and I'm going to stick with the Jets here against the Lions. All right, this next one, take your pick. The Steelers at the Panthers. Panthers 2.5-point favorites here. I'm going with the Panthers, man. It's only the second time all year I think I picked the Panthers to win a game, but I like their defense.
Yeah.
I think it's been kind of one of those, it's a loss. It's great. You know what we say this, Dillon? It's like we say it's a lost season. They're still in the race for the division. They can win the division here. So they got something to play for. Give me the Panthers because the Steelers are going to, I think, have Trubisky out there, and I just don't have any love for this offense. That's not surprising, but give me the Panthers at home here.
Carolina has been opportunistic in the secondary. Trubisky threw 3 picks. It seemed like when you're watching on Red Zone in rapid fire fashion on Sunday. I'm picking the Panthers as well. I think I picked Pittsburgh in some other recent games. I think they have shown some fight, but they still are an offense that has a lot of weaknesses, a lot of steps to go. And I think they're in a game like this, Pittsburgh's defense is pretty solid too. But I think Carolina's has come along, like you said, better than we anticipated. So I'll pick them to win this game. They're a slight on ESPN's Football Power Index. They're a slight favorite on that pick, and 2.5 here at home. I'll go with Carolina as well.
All right, on to the next one. The Chiefs at the Texans. Chiefs 2 touchdown favorites here. 14 points on the road in Houston. Not expecting perhaps a Texans repeat of kind of challenging the Cowboys for a little bit there, but yeah, I don't think there's much of a mystery here. I'll take the Chiefs.
Taking the Chiefs as well. Arguably the Super Bowl favorite. I'm not sure if that's actually the case. Maybe the Philadelphia is just given the path they have. But yeah, the Texans. I wouldn't look too far into what they did against Dallas. Maybe it does show that they have some fight in them. Maybe not to the point that they did last year. They actually won more than one game. But yeah, the Chiefs are. Even if the Chiefs take them lightly, maybe it stays a little closer in the first half. I think Kansas City ultimately pulls away and probably covers that 14-point spread.
Well, here's a game that I don't think has a ton of appeal. The Cardinals are at the Broncos. The Broncos are 3-point favorites in Denver. Oh, boy. Of course, Kyler Murray out for the season with a torn ACL. Russell Wilson, Dillon looks like what's the thought on him?
Oh, man, that concussion did not look good.
Yeah, I was going to say, that didn't look good. I can't imagine he plays, but that's just me spitballing here.
Still
I
in the
like
concussion protocol right now on Wednesday.
Yeah, I don't feel great about him playing. Even if he does, look at, the Broncos offense hasn't been great either, but I still think their defense probably gets it done here. To me, again, this is a low scoring game. Don't even know what the over-under set at, but I'll take the Broncos here.
Yeah, I'm taking Denver as well. I thought when Russell was playing against Kansas City, and I don't know if this says more about the Chiefs, some of the concerns we should still have with that Chiefs defense, but they had a few drives there that actually looked like what we expected going into the year from Denver. But their defense is still dominant, though. I don't know what to expect from Arizona. We said this even going into the year. I didn't really think they were a good football team. Obviously, without losing Kyler, some of the other injuries they've had some guys on defense step up in their roles, but they're still a bottom quarter of the league defense. So I think it's a low scoring affair. Like you said, I'm not sure what the over under is, but I would probably take the under even if it's super low. Maybe Denver gets some defensive touchdowns, but I think the Broncos still going to stick with them as the winner here.
Patriots at the Ravens, another one. Flip a coin here. This is a pick'em. Man, this is a tough one, isn't it? Because I think you look at these two teams, and Raiders trying to find a little momentum. Patriots coming off the win in Arizona against the Cardinals, of course. After Kyler's injury, but you got to give Patriots credit there. They made the plays. Their defense has been good. It's like this is the Josh McDaniels revenge game here, Dillon, I guess you could say, and. If you're asking me, Josh McDaniels versus Bill Belichick, that's an easy choice for me. I'll take the Patriots in this one. So may not be pretty, but I think they find a way to win.
I think it's going to be a tough day for the Vegas offense, even though I believe before we started recording we saw that they're going to get Waller, or at least they're activated off IR Waller and Renfro. So maybe that helps this Raider offense, which has been fine but not great. I think it's just their defense has been so bad. Obviously, at times it looked like they're going to hold the Rams to 3 points, and then Baker Mayfield just does his thing and flips that whole narrative. They have one of the worst pass defenses in the league still. I know that Max Crosby's been absolutely fantastic, but it's just a unit overall that I don't have any faith in. Where on the flip side, New England's defense is just going to, over the course of a game, start to crush you. I don't think they're a great matchup for the Raiders in the passing game. So New England did just have a ton of injuries in that Monday night game themselves. So maybe that does have a little residual effect. Also with the Raiders having, going from a Monday night game for New England, whereas the Raiders played on Thursday night, they get those extra 3-4 days of rest. So maybe that does contribute with injuries a bit, but I still think New England's just a better team, so I'll pick them to win this game.
All right, the Titans at the Chargers. Chargers 3-point favorites in LA there. Didn't love what I saw from the Titans against the Jags, of course. I think they'll bounce back and play better here, but Chargers coming off a nice win against the Dolphins. Give me Justin Herbert and company, despite what my sweatshirt may suggest.
This is a sneaky, really good game, I think, this weekend in terms of maybe it's not the prettiest football at all times, but with 2, 7, and 6 teams, a ton of playoff implications for both. You look at the Chargers' schedule after this, they have, out of the teams that are kind of in that neck-and-neck race for the last few wildcard spots, an easier go. This is their toughest game left. If they win this one, I think they're in pretty good shape. I'll pick the Chargers here. I do think that, if Mike Williams and Keenan Allen just stay on the field, we just saw how much better their offense looks. I don't think they're going to have Slater quite back this game. It is a tough game in terms of the front for Tennessee, I think, for them. I could see at times that being a possible problem. Also, a very different identity than the Miami team that just wasn't able to run against the Chargers defense that we know still struggles defending the run. Maybe not as bad as last year at times, but still in the bottom quarter of the league and run defense DVOA. Maybe Tennessee exploits that. Maybe this is a game where they're able to get those things going, but it's not like the Jaguars' run defense has been fantastic all year, and they couldn't stretch it out there. I'll also just sometimes these matchups look at a quarterback that's the one that you'd rather have, and it's pretty easy to say it's Justin Herbert at this point. So we'll pick the Chargers to win this one, which means they'll find a way to lose in a really sad and dramatic way.
Well, you may be right about that. The Giants are at the Commanders, a game that looked a lot different probably about a month and a half ago. Commanders are 4.5-point favorites in this one. And, given what we've seen from the Giants, I can't pick them here. I think Washington's got some momentum here, and they're playing a Giants team that seemingly has just hit a wall. I'll take the Commanders. Yeah,
they've fallen back to earth, and when, Giants fans should have been enjoying the start to the season, but on Twitter and stuff, you see people that were trying to say they're not quite as good as their record, and they'd get kind of mad. And it's like, well, you're starting to see it. Especially the defense has really fallen back to earth. We still thought they were a number of pieces away. I still do believe that Dable overall was a great hire for them. I think he's one of the primary reasons they've been able to win as many games as they did. But you look at our half so far at 7-5-1. But you look at when Saquon was limited by injuries in this last game on Sunday and how limited just overall their offense looked without him. That's just how crucial he's become. Darius Slayton has been playing pretty well for them, acted really well, honestly. But outside of that, you still wonder if they need some more receiving help. We'll see what they do in the draft. Maybe for their own future, it's probably best for them, and arguably for Washington both, to not necessarily make the playoffs and maybe look ahead to the future. But I think Washington's defense, as we've talked about, has come along. It's not quite to the 2020 defense it was in the top 3 or 4 of the league, but they're probably a top 10 unit. I don't think either team has a top 10 unit anywhere else on the field, so just that alone gives Washington an edge here. And I think, the Giants are just starting to – it's just been a tough go with some of the injuries they've had too, but also I think the Commanders have kind of found an identity, and they found a way to just gut these games out, and I feel like they're going to do so again on this one.
And then it is the Rams and the Packers. The Packers are 7-point favorites in this one in the new era for the Rams. I probably would have never expected that, Dillon. When the Rams won the Super Bowl last year, all the celebration, would you have thought that, we're kind of now celebrating the start of the Baker Mayfield era for the Rams? It's just kind of something that you probably didn't expect. But, hey, he led them to a win last week. Can he lead them to another one here? It's going to be cold in Green Bay, probably going to be snowing. I don't love the Rams' chances here, so I'll take the Packers.
Yeah, I'm taking the Packers too. I'm at least Baker makes the Rams' offense, it seemed like on Sunday or on that Thursday night game, a little more fun. Even in the first half when they only had 3 points, or through the first, till the last 3 minutes of the game. At least they were slinging it around a little bit. You could still tell that there's a lot of things that, you've only been there, as everyone's talked about, for 40 hours or whatever it was. So he's still learning the system. They're basically making things up on the fly, kind of throwing out some of the stuff they had met about. But there's still a team that, at this point, from the Rams' point of view, I think it's all about, even with Baker, I don't know if he's really going to feature into the long-term plans. I know there's some stuff Michael Lombardi said about concerns about Stafford's neck, everything the Rams have said, they feel like he's going to be completely fine going into next year. But otherwise, their main purpose here is to get the most out of Baker. If someone else signs him, they might get a 6th or 7th round comp pick. That's kind of the approach they're going with. Yeah. They already have 10 projected picks next year. So if Rams' point of view, it's just who do we find from our current young guys that are out there, all these guys getting opportunities, guys that some fans have never heard of. who do we see that's actually going to be a contributor when we ideally do have a lot of these players back, when we shore up our offensive line, when we don't have 10, 11 guys. It was the first, like the game against the Raiders was the first time all season they'd had the same 5 offensive linemen for consecutive games. They set the NFL record for that at game 9, but their first 12 games they had different 5 combo of offensive linemen. It's just been brutal for them, even with all the issues the Packers have. I'm sorry, the Rams just, and the defense is, so lenient in the front. They basically let you take whatever you want underneath. I think Aaron Rodgers or not Aaron Rodgers, I think with Jordan Love there, I think he's going to have some easy throws underneath, and it'll just be enough for the Packers in the cold and everything to find the way to win this one. I think they're just, even with their record sitting down there, it doesn't look like they're going to be in the playoffs. I still think like they're just a better team and a much better offense, at least at this point.
Well, there you go. There are our picks for Week 15 in the NFL, and I guess at this point, Dylan, our world-class choices, apparently, with you and I, apparently have done very well this season on our picks, but get ready for that to probably go out the window this week, as there will be some, there won't be some upsets in areas we think they're going to be. Some games will go the opposite direction. That's usually how it works. But there are our picks, and of course, Dylan got a lot of stuff over at ClutchPoints to get everybody ready for Week 15 in the NFL, so everybody know they can find all that.
You can follow the games in the ClutchPoints app. We have tons of stuff in there for predictions, previews, betting odds, and all. Looking at the best bets you can make, prop bet stuff. Kind of expanded all that. Lots of good fantasy stuff still coming through there. Lots of, obviously, all the injury updates. Tons of anything with Purdy tomorrow or today by the time you're potentially listening to this. Any other guys based on when they're going to be playing. We'll have all that content on ClutchPoints.com in the NFL section, and also the NFL section of the ClutchPoints app.
Yep, be sure to check it all out there. And as always, be sure to subscribe to the podcast. Any podcast app you use, search for Establish the Pass. Thanks as always for listening to the podcast.